fight Donald Trump. I'm joined by the one and only speaker, writer, and political analyst, and my colleague at RT America, Caleb Maupin, my favorite. Caleb, welcome.
Glad to be here, as always.
Now, I didn't see that one coming, did you? A Bloomberg Hillary Clinton ticket?
Well, it's not really surprising, right? The New York City establishment that Bloomberg represented when he was mayor of this city, Hillary Clinton, who represented New York in the U.S. Senate, and, you know, it's not really a shocking combination. I guess what is shocking is that Hillary Clinton would attempt to reintroduce herself into the American elections after the epic disaster of 2016. The fact that she was so overconfident, didn't visit Wisconsin, made statements about a basket of deplorables, you know, basically just offering just blatant hatred for so many people in Rust Belt states. The fact that anyone would even consider having her on the ticket again is certainly shocking.
Well, let's talk about him first then. He is spending big. He said he's prepared to spend $1 billion of his own money on this race. And I'll warrant he'll go further than that if he gets the nomination. He's burst into the ratings. I mean, I'm looking at the opinion polls every day. He's already well ahead of Biden and Warren. It's quite likely to come down to him versus Bernie for the nomination, isn't it?
Indeed, indeed. He's looking to be the centrist Democrat. And what's rather ironic is it's constantly being pointed out by Bernie Sanders' Democratic Party detractors that technically Bernie Sanders is a registered independent. But as a member of the U.S. Senate, as a member of the House of Representatives before that, he was always treated as a Democrat. He was a socialist. He was considered to be left-wing. He was treated as a Democrat. But when Bloomberg was mayor of this city, and I lived here when he was mayor of this city, he was a Republican. He was a member of the Republican Party, and he fought tooth and nail against the Democratic Party here on issues like living wage bills, for example. Not only did he veto a bill that would require all companies contracted by New York City to pay a decent wage, he not only vetoed it, he then sued the city over the bill to prevent it from being implemented. He worked really, really hard to prevent living wage legislation. When it came to the issue of the stop and frisk, with the police searching people randomly on the street without cause to make sure they have no weapons. That was a staple of his leadership of this city. So, yes, you know,
it wasn't quite random, was it, Caleb? It wasn't quite random.
Not exactly, no. I mean, it's been documented, and court cases showed that certain ethnic groups and were certainly targeted by it. Wasn't a random policy, but that was what he was all about. And he went after the Muslim community in New York City pretty viciously with the sending of provocateurs into mosques and all kinds of frame-up operations, you know, just stoking up fear of Muslims. And you know, on certain social issues, he was somewhat liberal, but he was not considered a friend of the Democratic Party here. But now, as he's, you know, competing in the national election, all of a sudden he and the Democratic Party elite are tied closer than a knot. I mean, they're closer than ever. What's interesting is Bill de Blasio, who is our current mayor, who endorsed Hillary Clinton in 2016, has endorsed Bernie Sanders. So that was kind of a surprise. Many assumed that because he had endorsed Hillary Clinton before, that he would then endorse some centrist Democrat this time. But Bill de Blasio, the successor of Michael Bloomberg, is now in the Bernie camp. So quite an interesting turn of events.
Now, Bernie's doing very well, but he's having to fight quite a large number of rivals. Presumably, they start to winnow out now. It's Las Vegas today, Nevada today, isn't it? How do you hear that's going? Well,
you know, if you'll recall, the last race in Nevada got pretty ugly when the Democratic National Committee of Nevada had their state convention. There was quite a bit of scuffling last time. It was particularly ugly. It was one of the more heated states. But what's really crazy is you just pointed out, you know, Bernie Sanders is the front runner at this point, according to all the polls, right? He was leading in the votes in Iowa, leading in the votes in New Hampshire. He's ahead, right? Polls show he's ahead. He is the front runner. But mainstream U.S. media just cannot bring themselves to say those words. They say, you they report on New Hampshire. Wow, second place for Buttigieg. Wow, third place for Amy Klobuchar. They just cannot bring themselves to say that Bernie Sanders is in the lead. It causes them physical pain almost. You watch these CNN anchors sit there and try their hardest to just not articulate that Bernie Sanders is winning. It's shocking to watch. They're painfully trying to report results without reporting victories for Bernie Sanders. It's like nothing we've ever seen. You want to talk about media bias? The results are there right next to them, and they cannot say the words Bernie Sanders is in the lead, Bernie Sanders is the front runner.
Is it safe to say, as I said earlier, that Biden is bust, that he'd be better retiring before further embarrassment overcomes him?
Oh, indeed. I mean, we've seen, between the inappropriate touching of women and these hugs that turn into him sniffing and the weird comments to little girls, you go a little bit further and the inappropriate racial innuendo and the claiming he was a civil rights activist and then backing away from the claim that he's a civil rights activist, and now all of a sudden he was a civil rights activist again. Weird anecdotes about fighting people with chains when he was a lifeguard at a pool. You have to wonder if this man, is starting to struggle with a little bit of dementia. I mean, you hear some of the things that has been said. So, many people are looking at Joe Biden and thinking, okay, you've got that bluster, you've got that working class tough guy charm that everyone likes, but you're saying things that are just not winning you any favors. It's very, very odd. And his relationship with the whole tough on crime situation, the fact that he called for building a wall along the Mexican border decades before Trump did, Biden seems to not really be the new flavor of the Democratic Party. He's not what all these young people who are excited to go out and beat Donald Trump and are pouring into Bernie Sanders rallies. Joe Biden isn't what they want to hear. He just isn't.
Now, on that kind of subject, we're not hearing so much about Bernie's age and previous heart problem because Bloomberg is the same age with much more serious heart problems. Have you noticed that?
Indeed. And it seems like all the leading candidates in the Democratic Party seem to be up there in age. There's certainly no danger of having a candidate who's too young and inexperienced. So it's quite amusing. But when you look at it, the Democratic Party, they have this legacy of being the party of urban political machines. And you can go back to the Roosevelt years. You can go back to even further than that. The Democratic Party has always been the party of urban political machines, and they are associated with corruption, with nepotism, and that has always been the curse hanging over the Democrats. The Republicans, on the other hand, they started out as a very radical left-wing political party that was opposed to slavery. Karl Marx was a supporter of the Republican Party, and the New York City Republican Party newspaper actually printed Karl Marx's writings, the New York Tribune, but they were always the party of small farmers and such, but they became the conservative party later. But even though the politics have shifted, the demographics remain. The Democrats are the party of urban political machines. The Republicans are the party of rural folks and farmers, and that divide remains. And while the Republicans are very fanatical and extreme, and people may not vote for them because they don't agree with them, with the Democrats, they have the problem, especially when it comes to centrists like, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and such, that people just don't believe what they say. They know what they are associated with. If you live in New York City, if you live in Chicago, if you live in Philadelphia, if you live under these long-standing Democratic Party machines, you know that a lot of times, there's a lot going on in the back room. There's a lot of deals that are being made. There's a lot of dishonesty, and that's what the Democratic Party is associated with. So maybe people don't agree with the Republicans, but they don't believe the Democrats.
Yeah, smoke-filled rooms, Tammany Hall. That is most people over here anyway. That's their idea of the Democrats. Before we leave them, what happens next? As I said, it's Nevada today. Is South Carolina on Tuesday?
Indeed. I mean, it's heating up. We've got many big primaries coming up, and Bernie Sanders is ahead at this point. It seems like the base of the Democratic Party agrees with Bernie Sanders. This notion that we ought to have guaranteed health care, we ought to have guaranteed college education. This is what rank and file Democrats believe. But there is a leadership of the Democratic Party that does not want to hear this, and there's a mainstream media, even MSNBC, which is Democratic Party, aligned. They just don't want to let this happen. They are reluctant. They are fighting this tooth and nail. So it's going to be crazy. What is going to happen at this convention? I mean, when we head toward July, what in the world is going to take place? How is the Democratic Party going to resolve this? And will the disagreements among Democrats ultimately result in a Trump victory? A lot of questions remain because this is an unprecedented situation. If you'd have said maybe 5-6 years ago that Bernie Sanders would be the presidential frontrunner, people would have laughed. Right? Things have rapidly, dramatically changed in the United States in the political climate.
Well, Donald Trump must be laughing, mustn't he? All of this is meat and drink to him, a divided Democratic Party. If they pick Bernie, he runs a red-baiting campaign. They're already calling Bernie not a socialist, but a communist, and sometimes with a capital C. If they don't pick Bernie, he'll be crying crocodile tears for how crazy Bernie was cheated again. If it's Bloomberg, it'll be the big New York billionaire against the midget New York billionaire, who might have more money but lacks almost everything else that Trump has got.
Indeed, I will say, right now it looks good for Trump, but there is one wild card, which is that, Donald Trump began his State of the Union address recently by saying that the U.S. economy is the best it has ever been in all of U.S. history, which is quite a dramatic statement to make. And he has seemed to bet all of the house. He has put all of his chips on the economy. And if something rumbles on Wall Street, and if things are not looking good economically, come October, November, Donald Trump could very well be suffering the consequences for these very grandiose and boastful statements he's made about the state of the economy. Because the reality is, even though stock market numbers are up, even though unemployment numbers are low, when it comes to the rate of debt in the United States, when it comes to our crumbling infrastructure around the country, when it comes to a whole generation of young people with low-wage, short-term jobs, a lot of people are suffering. And if things don't continue to go artificially high on the stock market, and if the economy rumbles a little bit, Donald Trump could soon be eating his words very dramatically.
You think even Bloomberg could beat him?
If this economy doesn't continue to go well, Donald Trump could be on his way out because he has bet everything. He has put everything he's got. He has boasted out at the highest volume about how good the economy is, and if the economy gets worse, he's got nothing. If
Bernie's cheated, will he run as an independent? If he's cheated and Bloomberg is imposed?
I don't think he will do that. No, I think Bernie Sanders will support the nominee. However, let's be clear, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and some others have indicated that they might not support Bernie Sanders if he ends up being the nominee. So, yeah, Bernie has always been, he endorsed Hillary Clinton. He said that he would support whoever the Democratic nominee is. But the centrists have actually not given a clear answer about whether or not they would back Bernie Sanders in November. So quite an interesting turn of events.
Finally, and I'm grateful for your time, Caleb, this anti-Semitism thing, I know it sounds utterly bonkers, given that Bernie Sanders is himself Jewish. But there was an attempt made to Corbynize Sanders on the issue of anti-Semitism, to call the man with the best chance of ever being the first Jewish president of the United States, to call him an anti-Semite. Has that prospered or flourished in any way?
Well, it depends who you ask, really. I think that the majority of American Jews are in the Democratic Party and don't see Bernie Sanders that way. However, among, more conservative Jews, Orthodox Jews, we've seen some interesting articles, like Jonah Goldberg, who is the editor of National Review, wrote an article, basically, he called it Karl Marx's Jew-hating conspiracy theory, arguing that any criticism of capitalism is inherently anti-Semitic, and that when Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, bourgeoisie was just code for Jew, right? So there is this feeling among a lot of right-wing forces that all leftism, all socialist ideology is somehow, a covert form of anti-Semitism, and that belief is widespread among Republicans and conservatives in the United States. However, I think for the majority of the folks in the Democratic camp, they don't buy that. They really, really don't buy that argument. What is interesting is it's pretty clear that Israel has no love for Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has said, while he's critical of Netanyahu and critical of the Israeli government, he actually takes a position that Israel, he recognizes it as a country. He supports Israel, basically, despite being harshly critical of it. But he was not invited, you'll recall, in 2016. He ended up not speaking to the the Israeli-American Political Action Conference. And that many people have pointed out that the pro-Israel forces in the United States have no love for Bernie Sanders. They don't trust him. They consider him to be not their friend. So it's a complicated situation there. Really, it is.
Well, complicated indeed, not least because Karl Marx also was Jewish, and the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 was routinely characterized as the Judeo-Bolshevik Revolution. And yet now we have such people smoking out Bernie Sanders and Karl Marx as anti-Semites. Caleb Maupin, always a pleasure to see you and hear you and your analysis. It won't be long, I think, before we talk again. Thanks very much for joining us. Let me take a quick break.